Hello and welcome to today's class, which is a strength and stretch conditioning kind of a yoga class, and it's for legs and glutes. So let's get started with a bit of stretching first. So we'll head into our seated forward fold. So I'm just going to scooch back on my mat a bit, sitting flat on the sit bones. So there's always that tendency to want to pull the flesh away. Be sure not to do that. So in order to keep the hamstrings tendons nice and safe, we'll even do the opposite. So we'll lift up and place equally onto each sit bone before we bend forward, lifting up nice and tall, and then reaching forward for whatever you can find. Reaching for your toes, maybe you find some shins, ankles, toes, and we just relax here for a little bit. So with all yoga stretching, we want to find the edge and not push past it. So I like to even place my hands on the outsides of the legs and lengthening through the back, but not rigid. There is a couple different styles of yoga. One is like a relaxed, we're stretching here. It's more of a yin style. And then a yang style would be lengthening and lifting. And what we're doing today is more of a yin style. So relaxing through this, finding the edge, not pushing past it, and just hanging out. As always, trying not to fidget, and breathing. So all yogic breathing through the nose, in through the nose and out through the nose. And then what might happen is, I'm just noticing myself, we've been here for maybe 30, 40 seconds or so, and there's more room. I feel like it's not that much of a stretch anymore. So maybe walking those fingers forward. Whenever the body gives you a little more space, feel free to take that space, but just don't take it before your body gives that to you. You could even relax the neck if you wanted to, let the head hang. And again, wherever there's space, maybe taking that little bit of space. Or sometimes the opposite is true. When you've been there a while, your body might be like, let's back out of this just a little bit. So constant communication between your body and your mind. And then slowly, 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 moving like we're 108, come on up. And then we'll stretch the opposite side of the legs. So we stretch the back side of the legs, now we stretch the front side, heading into a low lunge. And I like to use a folded blanket or some kind of cushion. We'll start with the right foot forward and the left leg back. And the left knee, so the back knee, will be on something squishy. Send that right foot forward, lifting up nice and tall. I'm actually going to grab a timer here. The timer is for your safety, not mine, because I love this one. So I'll just get talking and we'll be here for hours. But what we're trying to do here is, you might feel the stretch in the front hip, and that's totally okay, but we're actually trying to target the hip flexor muscles. So we do that by lifting up nice and tall. If you have something to lean on, a couch or a couple yoga blocks, mine are just right there and I forgot to grab them, but that's okay. If you don't have your blocks or if you forgot them like me, just placing your hands on your knee, and then you can actually use that or the blocks as like a bit of a, what am I trying to say? So what I'm doing right now is, you might be able to notice my arms are tense. So I'm actually pushing against my leg so that it reduces the stretch on that hip flexor. If I were to completely relax, no hands, you can see me sink down, right? And so if that's too much of a stretch, using the arm strength to come on up a little bit, and slow, deep breathing. after we've been here for a little while, you might be able to lessen up on the arms. So I always say low lunges are equally a leg stretcher and an arm strengthener because you want to help the body shy away from the pose without actually using the leg muscles to shy away from the stretch. We can do that while stretching as well. That's a different type of a stretch. But for today's stretch, just doing a nice static hold. And the static holds are the specific type of stretch that creates that long-lasting flexibility. So it really creates true mobility. Not to say that other types of stretching where you do resistance and that kind of thing doesn't build flexibility. I'm not saying that, but this one does tend to produce results that are a little bit longer lasting. When you do dynamic stretching, sometimes, I'll finish that sentence on the other side, slow, slow, slow. See, I told you, I get really excited about yoga. Nice and slow, switching sides. Okay, grunting is allowed in yoga and even encouraged. So taking those few moments to get settled in, finding the amount of arm strength that you need to support the pose to start, but always checking in. You might need less as we go. But as I was saying, with dynamic stretching, so in like a vinyasa style yoga class, you might find that at the beginning of the class, you are tight and you can't reach your toes, for example, when you're standing and bending forward. But at the end of the class, maybe you can. And then you think, great, yoga's helping me get flexible. But then the next day you come in and you're back to square one, it feels like. So a couple things. Number one, you're not at square one. It's just that the gains are not necessarily so much that it's noticeable. But number two, it's the dynamic stretching isn't as effective as the static stretching at long term. So when you're holding a stretch for well over a minute, 2 minutes, sometimes 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5, depending on the type of stretch. Some are safer to hold longer than others. You can really make some good gains there. So today we're doing that static stretching. Remembering to breathe. I was going to say long, slow, deep breaths, or if you've started holding your breath, because sometimes we do that if a stretch is a little bit more intense, we kind of, and we don't want to do that. You want to get your muscles lots of oxygen. Almost done already. And then slowly, slowly come on out. Taking your time. And the next one, everyone's favorite. So you might need a blanket for this one, you might not. I'm going to put mine aside. So we'll step the feet apart as far as they go once you find yourself in a seated position. I like to turn myself sideways on my mat so that I can have my hips on my yoga mat and then also my heels. But depends on how flexible you are. If your heels are not on your mat, that's okay too. So trying to just step them apart as far as they'll go today. And then if it's a struggle to stay upright, there's two options. One, just bring your hands behind you so that you don't have to struggle to stay upright, or be up on a yoga block or a folded blanket. I do recommend being up on a blanket or two. It does help to get that momentum carrying you forward. Not essential, but it can sometimes help, especially if you're close. You know, if you're like, I can be upright, but I feel like I'm gripping and holding on with my abdominal muscles, then just one blanket and it'll make it a lot easier to start that journey forward. And if you are already quite flexible, then you start moving forward as much as your body will allow until eventually you're just all in the splits and lying on the floor, all comfy like. Until that point, relaxing as much as is available. Now, the one question I get asked quite a bit is, where do I want my knees pointing? Do I want them pointing up? Do I want them tipping in? Do I want them backwards? A lot of people will have their knees either tipping in or backwards. And for this specific stretch and the purpose of this exercise, it doesn't matter too much. I like to have mine pointing relatively upright unless I'm leaning forward. Then they might tip in a little bit. But it's good to notice where they are, but don't worry too much where they are. And as always, if your body gives you a little more space, feel free to take that space. And for poses like this, I know I say it's everybody's favorite, but perhaps I'm being a little facetious there. If there is a pose that's really uncomfortable, I often talk about how shoulder stretches for me are really uncomfortable. Even closing the eyes can sometimes help eliminate distractions and just make the pose a little bit easier. And always checking in. Sometimes what we do when we head into a stretch and stay there for a long period of time, we start daydreaming or thinking about, well, what do I do next after I'm done my yoga? But if you're wanting your stretching and your strength training and your yoga practice to be really effective, the best thing to do is to keep that mind-body connection going, which is just, okay, what am I feeling? How much am I feeling this? Is it stretching too much? Is it stretching not enough? And really trying to find that edge. And the edge moves. So that's why keep in constant communication that mind-body connection. And then slowly come on up. And you might need to help your legs out of this one. So we've stretched the back side of the legs, we stretched the front side of the legs or the hip flexors, we stretched the inseams of the legs, and now for the outsides of the legs or the glutes, we'll head into fire log pose. So for this one, there's a couple different ways to enter this, and I like to enter the easiest way. So that's to bend the knees, keep the feet flat on the floor, and hands behind you so you can lean back. And then what we'll do from here is send the right ankle over the left knee, and you might need to help it get there. And then from here, if this stretches, stay here. Make sure that the knee feels okay. If not, you can flex the foot strongly. It helps to stabilize the knee joint. Otherwise, just let the knee tip out to the side. And then if you want to increase that stretch, send the chest towards the leg. And if you're still not feeling the stretch, then you're ready to go into the full fire log position. So we start to scooch that bottom foot inward, and then eventually the bottom knee lowers down towards the floor, the top knee lowers down towards the opposite ankle. So eventually the lower legs are stacked like little fire logs. So one ankle over the opposite knee, knee over ankle. There is a tendency to draw the feet inward, so be sure that we've got the feet outward and so that they're parallel. The lower legs are truly parallel. From here, if you do have yoga blankets or cushions and it's feeling like an intense stretch, but you're able to be upright, but just not quite like this, this is a choose your own adventure kind of a situation where you can place a folded blanket or a cushion or a block beneath the bottom knee or beneath the top knee. And then the more you scooch that cushion inward between the two lower legs, the more it'll assist. So, and never feel like using props is counterproductive. It's actually very, very productive because it lets you truly relax right into the hip socket. And that's super important because the hips are such a big joint and they have such insane capabilities of really taking the brunt of all of our external rotation. Oftentimes what will happen is the knees try to take over. If you're in a stretch and you don't have the flexibility, the knees are like, I'll do it. And they shouldn't. So we want to encourage the hips to take that stretch. But what happens is if we're tight, we tend to shy away from the stretch, and that's when the knees want to take over. So instead of going too far into a stretch where the knees kind of activate and try to take over, reduce the stretch, bring it to a very, very gentle stretch, and really try to target the hips. There was a lot of talking. If you're like, I have no idea what you just said, it's totally okay. Just try to feel a gentle stretch in the hips. Other side. Let's slowly reverse course, come on out. So remembering which side we're on, I've got my right leg on top. Extend the legs forward, maybe a couple little knee taps, and then we'll head into the second side, starting with that phase 1 position, so leaning back onto the hands, bending the knees, and now the left knee crosses over, the left ankle over the right knee, and then you might need to help it there. Again, you might want to move forward, so wherever you get stuck, just hold. If you're still okay, start scooching that bottom foot in until you are in a gentle stretch. So maybe you've got cushions or blankets beneath, between, beside the knees. And then wherever you feel like, okay, this is a gentle stretch, and yes, it is stretching in the hip joints, not in the knees, then relax and breathe. So again, sometimes people think, well, if my knees just hurt a little bit, that's okay. But really, it's really better to not feel any pain at all in the knees. No pain. No, just that's a standard. If there's any pain in a joint, that's bad. That you need to come out a little bit and really try to find that space where you feel the stretch in the hip joint. And that does take time. So if you're like, I don't know, it just stretches everywhere from like my eyebrows to my toes, that's okay too. As long as it's not sharp pain in a joint, just hanging out here. And then eventually we're trying to build that mind-body connection and knowing where our body is and how to encourage specifically the leg in the hip socket to take that stretch. And sometimes just bringing the awareness there. If we're not sure exactly how to make that stretch happen, if we're newer, just focusing your attention on the hips. Okay, I want the hips to stretch. Sometimes the body can sort of adjust and figure it out from there. Last few moments here, seeing if you can relax even more. And then we'll slowly come on out. And that completes our stretching portion of today's class. And now we get to do the strengthening part. So let's stand up and we'll head into some crescent lunges. I'm actually going to bring my timer with me all the way up here. So heading into crescent pose. So to get into crescent pose, I'll step my right foot forward and my left leg goes back and I'll be up on my tippy toes for the back leg. So flat on the floor with my front foot, tippy toes on the back foot. And this one's a balance posture. So right from here, you might want to extend your arms out to the sides to find that balance. And then you've got some adjusting maybe to do. If you have a narrow stance, your legs are like skis, that'll be harder to balance. And if you're like, I'd like a little more assistance, step your front foot out to the right a little bit more towards the pinky toe side of the foot. And the back foot could go out towards the outer edge of the mat as well. Pulling the belly in, arms out to a T position. And then what we're doing here, I'm going to start my timer, is we straighten the front leg and then we bend. So we're trying to bend the knee to be directly above the ankle and then straighten and bend and going at your own pace. So if your knee goes beyond the ankle, it just means you need to step that back foot back a ways. Mine's quite far back there, so I definitely don't need to do that. So keep going at your own pace, straightening and bending. So your arms, you can just sort of do whatever you want with them. We're not using them right now. You just get rid of them. And then, but out to the sides helps the balance situation. Now, there's more to this exercise. We want to make sure that we're feeling this in the glutes. And most of us, the quads want to take over. They're like, I got this. But we're trying to target the glutes. Most humans don't use their glutes as much as we should. It's such a large muscle group that really gives your whole body so much support and can prevent your back trying to take over. Like the back and the knees, I don't know what it is about them, but they're like, I got this. And meanwhile, there's all these other large sets of muscle groups that are perfectly capable. So again, just at your own pace, bending and straightening. And if you really want to get fancy, inhaling up, exhale, bend, which would mean you're doing a fairly slow up and down. This one I forgot to mention, I have a 2-minute timer and I can feel the burn already. And we still have time left on our timer. Isn't that fun? So in addition to feeling the front leg, you might feel the back ankle. But as I was saying with the glutes, so if you're not feeling that right glute, try pressing down into that front heel just until you feel the glute activating. So we're not necessarily supposed to do this exercise by putting all the weight into the front heel, but it can help you activate the glutes so that they start working. Because oftentimes it's just difficult to get the muscle going for some reason. So almost done. Okay, to come out, let's actually head all the way down to seated for a sec. We could just like jump into it switching sides, but honestly, like my back ankle is kind of on fire. So I'm just gonna lean back a little bit, couple little knee taps, because this makes it, I don't know if it makes it fun, but it makes it definitely less terrible. So I like to do a little, whatever this is, just sort of back and forth with the ankle joint to allow that blood flow to return, give it a little rest, and then we'll get going on the other side. So here we go, standing up, where we have the left leg forward and the right leg back. So left foot flat on the floor, back tippy toes, and then here we go. So again, we straighten and we bend. And if you're noticing, oh, my stance is too narrow, you can widen that stance a little bit. Or if it's not long enough, if your knee is going way beyond the ankle, you can send that back leg back a little bit. Otherwise, just keep going. And if you're not feeling your glute, of course, pressing into the heel. I usually do that every time just because sometimes mine don't activate either. So I'm like, right, checking in. Okay, glutes are working. And the other thing I like to think about too is when I'm straightening, pushing down. So I try to pretend like the floor, like I'm strong enough, I can just push the floor away. I'm making the whole floor move. Because why not? Visualize that. It helps me anyways get through my exercises when I actually pretend like I'm super, super strong. Belly scoops in to help the balance. And if you wanted to synchronize the breathing, it's inhaling up and exhaling down, which makes you go slower, which is sometimes harder, which is funner, which I think is a word. Okay, we're in the home stretch now. Keep going. Coco Gadget left side. And this is really a good balance workout as well. So if you're having struggles with the balance, find a focal point, something to look at, a spot that's not moving, somewhere on the floor in front of you, or maybe low on the wall. And we're done. Let's do the whole sit down thingy again. Okay. I always say move like you're 108, but that time I really felt like I was. So a couple little knee taps. Maybe a little of those shaky outies with the ankles and feet. But not for too long, because coming up we have squats. And those are just good, clean fun. So come on up. And for squats, step the feet apart and tip the toes out to the sides like a little bit. 45 degrees-ish. Like don't worry if you don't have your protractor, but 45-ish. And then I like to have my toes off the mat, but my heels on the mat just for like a yay distance apart. Then from here, thinking about pressing into the pinky toes side of the feet. So we inhale up, same thing. Exhale down, arms can be wherever. And then maybe you go all the way down, maybe not. Doesn't matter, just go as low as you can. And coming back up again, and just keep going. So you can go up and down quick, looking like a hummingbird, or nice and slow. And with this one, so really try to keep the heels on the ground. If the heels are popping up, then just only go as far as you're able to. And again, we're trying to find that mobility in the hip joints. So the knees try, which is why we say press into the pinky toe side of the feet. Because if you don't, the knees will just kind of automatically tip inwards, and we want to encourage the knees to tip outwards. Keep going. And if by now you're like, I don't want to keep going, then just take breaks, either at the bottom, hang out for a stretch for a little bit extra time, or standing for just a couple extra rounds of breath. And for this one too, trying to use the glutes. I keep thinking I'm going to give you some silence so you can enjoy the exercise, but there's so much to say. So trying to use the glutes. So here again, you could too keep thinking about pressing into the pinky toe side of the feet, but also into the heels if you're trying to activate the glutes. So I'll press into my pinky toe side of the feet and also the heels to really feel the glutes, because the quads will want to take over completely. And of course we're going to feel the quads, but we want to feel the glutes as well. Keep going. Almost done. And we're done. But not done our class. We have one more super fun exercise where we get to lie down though. So it's a good one. So laying back, actually we don't need this timer, working on bridge pose, but it's like a cross between static and dynamic. I'll explain. Laying all the way back, bending the knees, with the feet on the floor slightly wider than hips width apart. Feet are parallel, arms along your sides, palms facing down and looking straight up to the ceiling. From here, lift the hips high to the sky and hold. So this is the static part. Normally in yoga, if you want to go further, you could interlace the fingers behind you, and I suppose you could. I'm going to keep mine along my sides with the palms facing down because we're here for a while. Not a long while. In fact, specifically, we're here for 50 seconds. And then what we'll do is we'll lower and we'll rest for 10 seconds and we'll repeat. So this is an insanely awesome exercise. I love it a lot. While we're here, think of lifting the hips super high to the sky. So try to create as much space between yourself and the floor as possible. Lift the hips up, lift the hips up, lift the hips up, and then lower all the way down. We rest for 10 seconds. Hold, breathe through the nose. And again, hips go up. And holding here. This is such a good exercise. This pose in general, it's a heart healthy pose as the blood is flowing towards the heart. And it's also really good for the back body strength. So we're working the glutes, of course, we're working the hamstrings, we're working the lower back, getting all of that stronger. Usually in the course of our day, just humaning, there's not a whole lot of activities that actually activate all those three areas. So, and if they do, it's certainly not as much in comparison as the front body. So it's really good for muscular balance to work on things like bridge pose. And lower for 10 seconds. Last one coming up. For 3, 2, 1, and go. Hips go up. See if you can press the hips just a little bit higher, creating lots of space between yourself and the floor. Remember to breathe. And also trying to keep equal weight on each foot, especially if you're starting to feel a little bit tired. Really focusing. Feet are flat on the floor. They're still parallel. So even though we can't really see the feet because we're looking at the ceiling, see if you can think of where your feet are. Use your mind's eye and try to see, did my toes start to tip outward or are they parallel? Last few moments here. See if you can lift the hips just a little bit higher. And relax. From here, hug the knees into your chest. This is called Apanasana. And maybe a little rock side to side. Knees to chest pose. And to come out, let's be nice and gentle so you can release the knees, feet back to the floor. Raise your arm along your side, reaching on the floor, and roll over onto your arm to the right side, pausing here for a few moments. Couple deep breaths. And then slowly press yourself all the way up to a cross-legged seated position. And that's all I have for you for this class. For our legs and glutes, we did a stretch, we did a strength. So I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I hope you have a really, really good rest of your day. Namaste, and I will see you next time.